Welcome. Now, I want to warn people who are listening tonight, as you can tell by the photo at the beginning, there's going to be very strong allegations brought forward in this video. So be ready for that. Be warned now. Now, we are going to be discussing a specific passage from Hulk Hogan, My Life Outside the Ring. I just finished it recently, and truly a very powerful piece of literature. And one thing I want to note, just as I'm kind of combing through the book, is it's actually listed as juvenile literature. But trust me, once we get into the claims, there's nothing juvenile about it. Of course, unless it involves juveniles, which would hopefully not be the case. But when it comes to Patterson, we know anything goes. So let's get into it. Terry, he calls this part of the book Fighting My Way In. This would be Terry speaking now to the audience. When I first got into the business, I had no idea there were gay wrestlers in wrestling. I just never thought about it. It's not unlike the whole gays in military issue, I suppose. It was sort of a don't ask, don't tell back then for the most part. It's just sort of the way it was. There was this one wrestler named Pat Patterson who was wrestling in Florida who was openly gay, though, which was kind of shocking to me then, just because I had never really encountered that before. I love the guy to death, and he's a great guy. But he's one of these guys who will rib you about stuff. He's always joking, and I didn't know that this time. His pal Buddy Colt was the Florida champion, and I didn't know if he was gay or not. There were always rumors. As it turned out, the way things went down before that first match of mine, it really didn't make a difference. The day before a big match, Pat Patterson stops by the gym. "Hey Terry," he says, "why don't you come down to the Sportatorium tomorrow? We'll ride down to Fort Myers together." I didn't care one way or the other but the fact he was gay. I was just psyched that a big wrestler and a name like that would reach out to me. So I get into the car with Pat and Buddy the next day. And Pat says, "Hey, you know what? This is a big night for you." "Yes, sir, Mr. Patterson." "Well, this is your initiation night." And I'm just turning the page here. But like I said, I was really scared. I was so worried about getting beat up or what I'd have to do to win, or if I'd end up losing my first time out. "Well, you know what," Pat says, "we got you in the car because we've been chosen to initiate you tonight." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well," Pat says, "we got about 150 miles to go before you get to that arena. And you had to give one of us, well, I guess this would be like a term for oral sex." "What?" I said. "What do you mean?" "You have to give us a blow job before you get to the building because that's your initiation before you can wrestle," he says. I was completely taken aback. "Well, I can't do that. You know, I've never done nothing like that. I'm not gay. I can't do that," says Terry. They both got real serious. "Well, you have to do it." "I'm not going to do it." I was horrified. I was upset. All this time, I've done nothing but prepare for this night, and they're telling me I have to do this thing that I can't possibly do, or they won't let me wrestle my first match. It was seriously messed up. I didn't have the slightest clue. "I can't do this. This is effed up," I said. "I just wanted to wrestle, and they took advantage of how serious and focused I was. They tortured me. It was the longest car ride of my life. On top of worrying about the match, how I do if I look like a fool in front of the stadium full of people. They put this fear into me that they wouldn't let me wrestle if I didn't do this horrible thing. Now let me just take the quick break to talk about, how sick that is. I mean, really, truly back in that 80s era, high risk sex activity was just coming into vogue. And of course, there has been the claims that Hogan himself has been involved in a lot of those high risk sexual activities. So, I don't doubt the story he's telling here. I think it's truly horrifying. Anyway, so, this is the part that really disturbs me the most. So, Terry continues talking about how he refused. Finally, we're pulling into the parking lot. They said they still wouldn't let up on him. Okay, they said, since you didn't give one of us a blowjob before your match, we're going to have to tell the other guys that you failed your initiation. So after the match, in the shower, in the locker room, everybody's going to grab you and blank you in the blank. And that passage right there is where I really drew the line. And of course, he said he was joking, ribbing. But we don't really know that for sure. I mean, this is when Hulk was just coming up. He wasn't the big name. Somebody could have known he was just coming up now and said, Pat, just hold off on this guy. We're expecting big things. Because it's also interesting that around close to the same time, there was also Terry had the AIDS scandal, where it was rumored that Howard Finkel was the one who donated the blood for Hulk's AIDS test. And, it really troubled me, just the thought of, these guys back then saying, quick, who could we grab who wouldn't be living this high-risk lifestyle, the Fink. Truly makes me sick. But once again, more sickening allegations brought forward by another WWE legend towards Patterson. And, this has been a troubling cycle for many years. And, up until his death, he was still celebrated. In fact, still given major title runs in that company. But as the title of the video said tonight, I think he can only, with the stories like this coming out, he can truly only rest in allegations.